heard the story. Henry VIII, England's Renaissance king, died peacefully in his bed on January 28, 1547.
Surrounded by his loyal counselors. A dignified end to a magnificent reign.
The official record says he passed quietly, was embalmed with all proper ceremony, and buried with honors befitting a monarch.
It's all fucking bullshit. It's all fucking bullshit.
Henry VIII died screaming. His body was rotting from the inside out.
The infection was so advanced that his corpse exploded in its coffin 3 days later, leaking putrid fluid across a chapel floor.
Dogs licked up the remains of England's king.
The Tudor government buried this grotesque reality for 450 years.
But court physician records, suppressed, hidden in private collections, finally unearthed, tell the real story.
This wasn't a peaceful death. This was a medical horror show.
And what happened to his body afterward was so disturbing that witnesses were threatened with execution if they ever spoke about it.
January 24th, 1536, Greenwich Palace. Henry VIII is 44 years old, still remarkably athletic for a Tudor monarch.
He thunders down the tilt yard in full armor, 300 pounds of man and metal combined, aiming his lance at his opponent.
Then everything goes catastrophically wrong.
The horses collide. Henry is thrown violently to the frozen ground. His warhorse, a massive destroyer bred for battle, stumbles and falls directly on top of him.
The impact is devastating.
The tilt yard went silent. We thought the king was dead. For 2 hours, he lay there unconscious. 2 hours where England had no king. We stood frozen, too terrified to breathe. When he finally woke, something in his eyes had changed. The man who opened his eyes wasn't the same man who'd ridden into that joust.
Modern neuroscientists analyzing the historical records believe Henry suffered a traumatic brain injury to his frontal lobe, the area responsible for personality and impulse control.
The behavioral change was immediate and dramatic.
Before the accident, Henry had been married to Catherine of Aragon for over 20 years before seeking an annulment. He'd executed relatively few nobles.
He was known for his charm, his intelligence, his restraint.
After January 1536, Anne Boleyn lost her head 4 months later. Thomas Cromwell followed. The executions became routine.
In Europe pestis perfectual tinus frailest. The king's rages became legendary.
I don't remember the accident clearly. I remember the ground rushing up. Then nothing. Then waking to faces staring down at me like I was already a corpse. But something felt different. Wrong. Like part of me stayed on that frozen ground and never got back up. The anger came easier after that. The suspicions. The certainty that everyone around me was plotting my destruction. But the brain injury was just the beginning. The same accident reopened an old leg wound that would never heal again.
In an England without antibiotics, without any real understanding of infection, this wound became a death sentence. Just a very, very slow one.
I became the king's physician in 1543, 7 years after the accident. By then, the ulcers on both legs were beyond anything I'd seen in 30 years of medical practice. Open sores the size of tennis balls, constantly weeping pus. The stench was unbearable. We drained them daily, sometimes twice daily, filling bronze bowls with infected fluid. The king screamed during the draining. Every single time. For years.
Imagine living with open wounds on both legs for 11 years. The pain so intense that even silk bed sheets felt like knives.
No relief, no healing, just constant grinding agony that poisoned every waking moment. Henry tried desperately to hide the deterioration. Lead-weighted garters to compress the wounds, Arabian perfumes mixed with ambergris to mask the smell.
Portrait painters instructed to depict impossibly athletic legs.
But the infection wasn't just destroying his legs, it was poisoning his entire bloodstream. And that's when the real nightmare began. Modern medical analysis of the symptoms described in court records suggests Henry developed chronic osteomyelitis, a bone infection that releases a constant stream of bacteria and inflammatory compounds throughout the body.
Every single day, toxins from the rotting tissue entered his circulation.
Traveling to his brain, his liver, his heart. It was a slow internal siege on his entire being.
The pain was excruciating, constant. Imagine the worst toothache you've ever experienced, but in your legs, never stopping, for over a decade. The fever came and went in waves. One day he'd be drenched in sweat, the next shivering with chills so violent his teeth cracked. His appetite swung wild, gut-wrenching nausea, followed by insatiable hunger that saw him consume entire roasted swans in a single sitting. But the neurological effects were the most disturbing. The toxins crossing into his brain tissue triggered violent mood swings that had nothing to do with actual emotions. He'd be laughing at a jest one moment, then ordering the jester's execution the next. No provocation, no reason, just sudden, explosive rage.
The paranoid delusions became commonplace. Henry began seeing enemies everywhere.
Servants poisoning his food, wives committing adultery, foreign assassins lurking in every shadow. I knew they were plotting against me, all of them. I could see it in their eyes. The servants who changed my bandages, the physicians who claimed they were helping, the counselors who smilled while planning my murder. I started demanding food tasters, not just for meals, but for my medicines. I made servants supply my ointments to their own skin first, to test for poison. Some of them died. Probably coincidence. Or maybe they were guilty. By 1540, just 4 years after the accident, Henry had executed his second wife, annulled his marriage to his third, and was hunting for number 4. 17-year-old Catherine Howard to his 50 years. The contrast must have been grotesque.
1542 marked a terrible turning point. The ulcers, which had been manageable if disgusting, suddenly worsened dramatically.
The discharge changed color. Where once it had been yellow-white pus, it turned green, then a putrid brown. The smell evolved from merely foul to something witnesses described as the stench of death itself. I documented everything in my private notes, knowing the official records would never reflect the truth. The wounds grew so deep I could see bone clearly. The flesh around the ulcers turned black. Gangrene was setting in.
Henry's weight exploded. Unable to exercise due to the agonizing leg pain.
Eating constantly to distract from his misery, he ballooned from 280 pounds to well over 350.
His armor from 1540, preserved in the Tower of London, shows a 48-inch waist. By 1545, new armor required a 54-inch waist measurement.
That's wider than most modern refrigerators. The palace itself had to be modified. Doorways widened. You can still see the construction marks at Hampton Court.
Floors reinforced with additional beams after the king's weight caused dangerous sagging. Special chairs built with removable arms because Henry could no longer fit between them.
Henry's final portrait, the famous Whitehall portrait that became the template for how we imagine him today, contains a devastating secret. When the painting was X-rayed in 1960 during restoration work, conservators discovered something that had been painted over.
Henry's left hand, which appears to be gripping a simple cane, originally held something else entirely, a wooden staff topped with a human skull.
The king carried that skull everywhere. He'd tap it against the floor during conversations. a nervous tick that unnerved even his most loyal courtiers. We developed signals to warn each other about his disposition: red ribbons for rage, black for depression, white for the increasingly rare moments of calm. When he had the skull in hand, we knew to stay silent and avoid eye contact.
The skull wasn't a Gothic fashion statement. Henry had become utterly obsessed with death.
Some whispered it belonged to a monk from one of the dissolved monasteries. Others claimed it was the skull of an executed enemy. After Henry's death, his son Edward VI, just a boy, ordered the detail painted over. The young king couldn't bear the thought of his father being remembered as the death-obsessed madman he'd truly become.
I wanted to look death in the face, to hold it, to control it.
If I carried death with me, maybe it couldn't surprise me. Maybe I could master it the way I'd mastered everything else.
But the skull just stared back with empty sockets, reminding me that kings rot the same as peasants.
Court records from those final months of 1546 paint a picture of absolute terror. Henry's mood swings had become so extreme that survival required constant vigilance.
A servant who sneezed during a royal audience was dragged away for interrogation as a possible assassin using poison powder. A lady in waiting who accidentally stepped on the king's robe was banished, her family's lands confiscated. We lived in constant fear.
One particularly chilling incident occurred during a state banquet in November 1546. The French ambassador documented what happened.
Mid-meal, the king suddenly stood, a process requiring several servants and causing him visible agony.
He began shouting at an empty chair. "You dare show your face at my table!" he screamed, pointing at nothing. The entire court sat frozen. Henry continued his tirade against what he clearly believed was Anne Boleyn's ghost. "I took your head once, I'll take it again."
Then he collapsed back into his chair, seemingly exhausted, and resumed eating as if nothing had happened.
By Christmas 1546, Henry had become something barely recognizable as human. Contemporary accounts describe a massive figure propped up in his throne, unable to stand without assistance.
His face had swollen to nearly twice its original size, features distorted by grotesque fluid retention. His eyes, once a bright blue that poets compared to summer skies, had become yellowish and bloodshot, sunk deep in pouches of discolored flesh.
The smell emanating from the royal person had become impossible to disguise. Despite pounds of perfume, despite the constant burning of incense, despite fresh herbs scattered on the floors, the stench of decay followed him everywhere.
Courtiers would discreetly hold pomanders to their noses when approaching the throne. Some of the more delicate ladies would excuse themselves and vomit after mandatory appearances before the king. We all knew he was dying. We could smell death on him, but nobody dared speak it aloud.
January 1547, Whitehall Palace. Henry VIII enters his final agonizing decline.
And what happens next is so disturbing that his own government suppressed the records for centuries.
The official record states Henry died peacefully. Archbishop Cranmer's private diary, discovered in the Lambeth Palace Library in 1983, tells a very different story.
I was summoned near midnight on January 27th. When I entered the royal bedchamber, I found a scene from hell itself. Henry was experiencing seizures so violent that 6 men had to hold him down to prevent him from injuring himself further.
His massive body convulsed with such force that the reinforced bed frame cracked. He vomited black bile, a sign his digestive system was hemorrhaging internally. The smell was beyond description. I had to excuse myself twice to vomit. I've administered last rites to plague victims, to men dying of battle wounds, but nothing prepared me for this.
During brief moments of stillness,
Henry's eyes would focus on things that weren't there.
He cried out for his dead children, the miscarriages, the stillbirths. He begged them to forgive him, promised to be a better father if they would just come back. Then his voice would change, becoming high and terrified as he screamed about flames.
He demanded someone put out the fire that only he could see.
As the clock approached 2 a.m. on January 28, his breathing changed to what I now know physicians call the death rattle, a wet gurgling as the lungs filled with fluid.
I asked him to squeeze my hand if he trusted in Christ for salvation. He squeezed once, weakly. Then his grip went slack.
At 2:07 a.m., January 28, 1547, King Henry VIII was dead.
But the horror wasn't over. Henry's corpse began decomposing with shocking speed. The infection didn't stop with death. It accelerated. Within hours, his already bloated body swelled even larger as bacteria produced gases inside the corpse. The smell impossibly grew worse. When we opened the body to remove organs for preservation, we discovered the true extent of internal decay.
The liver was so enlarged and diseased it fell apart when touched. The heart was swollen to twice normal size, surrounded by yellow fluid. The intestines were black with gangrene.
The Privy Council kept Henry's death secret for 3 days. They desperately needed time to handle the rapidly deteriorating corpse.
We packed the body cavity with over 100 pounds of salt and aromatic herb. We wrapped the corpse in wax cloth soaked in turpentine. We sealed everything in a massive lead coffin that required special reinforcement.
During the lying in state at Whitehall, witnesses reported strange sounds from the coffin, pops and gurgles as gases continued building inside.
Then came the procession to Windsor on February 14th. The journey stretched to 3 days. On the second night at Syon Abbey, the pressure became too much.
The coffin split open with a sound like a thunderclap. Putrid fluids leaked out, pooling on the chapel floor.
The smell was so overwhelming that guards fled their posts. In the morning, we discovered dogs had entered during the night.
They were licking at the fluids that had leaked from the king's coffin.
God's anointed, who broke from Rome to assert his divine right, ended as food for scavenging dogs.
Edward Seymour ordered all witnesses to absolute silence on pain of death. The official record stated simply that Henry died peacefully and was buried with appropriate honors.
The truth would have destroyed royal prestige. We couldn't let England know their king died screaming, that his corpse exploded, that dogs licked up his remains. So we buried the evidence, along with the body.
The truth stayed hidden for centuries. The golden Renaissance prince, once called the handsomest ruler in Christendom, ended as a 400-pound mass of infection and decay.
The king who executed wives and terrorized a nation died rotting from the inside out.
And the Tudor government successfully erased it all. That is all for this video. Subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.